Alright, so let's begin this module with a review of the Python datetime module. And as a reminder, a module is basically a Python source file. It's sort of like an internal library that Python loads on demand. And again, the reason that it does this is to conserve memory. Until you need to work with datetimes, there's really no need to use up that memory to store all those available methods and objects. Now that we need to work with datetime, we have to import our datetime module, and we did that in the last lesson, and we gave it an alias of dt. Now datetime can get a little bit confusing at first because we have our datetime library, or rather our module, all kind of synonymous terms, and within that module we have a datetime method, so to speak. So we have a datetime method that we can call on the datetime library. So if we didn't have that alias of dt, you might see some other people's codes where it reads datetime dot datetime because it's using the module then calling the datetime method within it. So that might be a little bit confusing, but we have the dt alias, but I'm just clarifying that there is both a datetime module and within it a datetime method that creates a datetime object. So it's a little bit funky, but you'll get used to it as we go along. Let's begin, before we go to datetime, with the date object. So of course date is basically an object that's used to store a date, like the kind you'd see on a calendar. So a date, of course, will include a year, a month, and a day, while a datetime object will include those three, a year, a month, and a date, but it will also allow you to specify the hour, the minutes, and the seconds. So a date object is kind of like a smaller, more condensed version of a datetime object because it only represents, a single date, while a datetime object can be used for more clarity, more specificity when you're specifying a timestamp. So let's begin. I'm going to use my datetime module, which we have stored in dt, or I'd rather have the alias dt. And if I press my dot and press tab key, you'll see all of the available methods or classes that are available within my datetime module. And you can see the ones that we're focused on, date and datetime, are the first two. So let's begin with date, and it's a method, so it will require a pair of parentheses at the end. Let's now press Shift Tab to take a look at our parameters. And it may not actually show up here. Let's see if I can expand this to the bottom. I guess it doesn't show up, although it is present here in the documentation. Year, month, and day are what it expects. So let's create a sample day. Let's say we picked 2016. The year comes first, followed by the month. So let's say my birthday, the 4th of April. So I can do 4 for April and 12 for the 12th. So this is April 12th, 2016. And when I execute this, we'll see that we've created a date object that has that. Nothing special right now, but we can see that it has in fact been generated. So of course the first value is always the year. We could specify something different like 2000 here. The second argument is the month. Let's say I want the first. Now I have January. And if I want to provide, or I have to provide, a last argument, that represents the day. So if I change this to something like 20, I now have January 20th, 2010. So let's go ahead and store this date object in a variable so we can see some of its attributes. So I'm going to call the variable someday and execute this. So now someday has our date object. And if I type out someday and add my dot and click tab, you can see all of the methods and attributes that are available on my standard date object within Python. So we have the predictable ones, like year is an attribute that will return the year component of the date, which is the 2010 in this case. We also have a month attribute, which returns the month from our date, which is 1, of course. And we also have a day component, which returns the day from our date. So pretty simple. It's hopefully the kind of syntax and the structure of objects and methods and parameters is starting to make sense now that we've played around with it so much in Pandas. You can see it's really the exact same thing in Python. We have attributes and methods that are available on different objects. In this case, though, the objects are coming directly from Python. So let's go right ahead and create a datetime object, which, as I mentioned, includes those additional arguments for hour, minute, and second. However, they're not required. So if I call dt.datetime, so this time I'm creating a datetime object instead of a date object, And let's say I give it the exact same arguments, 2010, 1, and 20. I'm basically specifying January 10th, 2010, but the datetime object has to have a time. That's how the object is structured. And since I didn't provide a time, it's going to default to midnight. So when I execute this, you'll see that it's substituted zeros for my hour and minute parameter. So it's basically now a timestamp. It's not just a date. It's not like 24 hours. It's specifically midnight, 12:00 on January 10th, 2010. Now, if I want to provide the hour, I can just feed it in as the fourth argument. So let's say I want to do 8:13 in the morning. Well, let's begin with 8. So this is just 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 a.m. on January 10th, 2010. If I wanted to provide minutes, that's going to be my fifth argument. So I can do 8:13. So this is going to be 8:13, the start of that minute on January 10th, 2010. And finally, my sixth argument can be the second. So if I want to specify right towards the end of the minute, 57 seconds in, now it's 8:13:57 on January 10th, 2010. So it's year, month, day, hour, minute, second. And if you leave out the hour, minute, or second, it's going to substitute zeros. If you want to do something in the afternoon, keep in mind that you'll have to think in military time. So for example, if I want to do in the afternoon, let's say 5 o'clock, you have to write 17, which is the military time for 5. So that's 5:13:57 p.m. on January 10th, 2010. And there you can see we have that datetime object. Now, if you want to see it in kind of a more readable human format, you can always pass it to the built-in string method in Python, which is str. And you'll see that it's going to output it for us with the kind of more traditional way you might see on a spreadsheet or in a common system. So we have those dashes and those spaces and those colons. And we can do the same thing, by the way, with a regular date object. So if I pass my someday variable, which is storing a date object, into Python's str or string method, which converts it to a string, you'll see that we're just going to get the date component. No time is included in a regular basic date object. It is included, however, in datetime. That's why we have the difference in names. Pretty predictable. So I'm just going to copy this and also assign it to a variable. Let's do sometime instead of someday. And once again, the same attributes are available. We do have year, 2010. We do have month. It's the first month, or January. We do have a day, which is the 10th. We do have new attributes like hour, predictably. So it's the 17th hour, or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We also have a minute argument that's going to give us the 13th minute of the hour. And we also have the second, which is a brand new argument that attribute that we're introducing, and it's the 57th second. So right now you're kind of thinking, okay, well, these are obvious, and what's the point of this? Well, it's really effective when you're working with dates and you may want to extract something. So maybe you're going to have a combination of columns, and you're going to have dates represented in one of them, but the dates are going to represent a specific day. And maybe you want to do an analysis of, let's say, by month, revenue by month. Well, in order to be able to aggregate that, you're going to have to be able to extract the month from every date, even though the dates may be different. One may be January 13th, the next may be January 19th, but you want to store them all under January. And instead of writing a big complex if statement where you can do something like, if this, then that, you can basically say, just create a brand new series and extract the month attribute from every single value in that series, and then you have that aggregated view very easily. So it's really helps to make things, it makes things convenient and efficient. So that's just a quick review of the Python datetime module and its two main objects, which are date and datetime. In the next lesson, we'll start seeing how dates and times are represented in pandas, and it's going to be an introduction to something called the timestamp object. So we're going to transition this to pandas in the next lesson. I'll see you there.